Hello, my name is Mireia Yurrita, and I'm a PhD student at TU Delft and a Marie Curie Fellow at the Decode Network. Along with my colleagues, Dave Murray-Rust, Agathe, Balayn, Alessandro, Bozzon, we wrote a paper called Towards a Multi-Stakeholder Value-Based Assessment Framework for Algorithmic Systems, which I'm very happy to present. So in recent years, algorithmic systems are widely being used for decision-making in areas such as healthcare, education, or recruitment processes. Some of these algorithmic systems have been proven to encode biases, such as racial biases or gender biases, and to favor very specific groups of the population. So in an effort to regulate these ML-driven, machine learning-driven systems and ensure that the development of such systems is done in an ethical way, there have been in these last years many proposals, many approaches that deal with this problem. So standardized documentation practices have been suggested both for data sets and models. Some auditing techniques have also been suggested, and many public and private organizations have suggested ethical principles that ML-driven systems, that algorithmic systems should follow to ensure that they are indeed ethically aligned. In our paper, we argue that both standardized documentation practices and auditing techniques have been very impactful and influential methodologies for dealing with harmful algorithmic bias, identifying bias, and giving the resources and methodologies, strategies for debiasing algorithmic systems. However, many of the values, many of the principles that are outlined in ethics in AI documents are still not taken into account in current auditing practices. And the problem with ethical principles for ML-driven systems is that they are too high level and very difficult to operationalize, so that practically minded people can apply them, can put ethics into practice. So we want to deal with those limitations, and that is why we create a value-based assessment framework in which we guide the reader to unpack, to first of all identify ethical values that should be taken into account when developing and deploying algorithmic systems. And once those values are identified, we want to guide the reader on how to operationalize those values through or by breaking these values down into criteria and their manifestations. Since some of those values represent trade-offs, there are trade-offs between values as in any socio-technical system, and there are even some criteria which are mutually exclusive, we want to also give the means to enable multi-stakeholder deliberation that will deal with systematically negotiating potential trade-offs and conflicts between criteria and values. So the first step that we took in order to do so was to research the literature and arrange prominent ethical values in literature in a geometrically meaningful way. So adjacent values in our circular framework denote common motivations, whereas the values that are arranged opposed to each other denote potential trade-offs that need to be negotiated in the following stages of the assessment framework. So that's the first step. First of all, we identify the values and we arrange them in a meaningful way. Then we break these values down into criteria and their manifestations, among which there is a many-to-many relationship. And since we need to deal with value trade-offs and criteria trade-offs as well, we decided to map the stakeholders that should be present in those deliberation processes and assign them communication means that are currently available for presenting information specific to each value manifestations in a way that is adapted to their insight needs and purposes. In order to guide the reader throughout these process, the mapping of the values, the breaking them down into criteria and manifestations, and mapping of stakeholders and communication means, we decided to use a motivating example, which is the automated life insurance application process, where we can unpack each of the details of the stages of the assessment framework. We acknowledge that there are some design choices that we had to make that lead to some limitations. We also acknowledge that this framework needs to be tested across contexts to ensure consistency, and that it should be part of a broader evaluation workflow. There is a need for standardization. So I hope you find this interesting and that you read our paper and enjoy.